Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Atlanta Regional Commission's weekly webinar series held every Tuesday afternoon at 2:30 p.m. I am Molly Bogle with ARC's Community Development Group, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Adapting municipal budgets in response to COVID-19 is a joint effort of the ARC and Georgia Municipal Association, an organization that has been providing valuable coordination and technical assistance to cities throughout the state of Georgia. Kay Love, Managing Director of Georgia City Solutions at the Georgia Municipal Association, has been instrumental in pulling together this event. So thank you, Kay. As many of you are acutely aware, COVID-19 has taken a considerable toll on municipal budgets. Sales and use taxes are the third highest revenue source for cities and counties within our region, making up almost 20% of county revenue and 15% of city revenue. May 2020 sales taxes in our region alone are down almost 20% compared to May of 2019. In addition, property taxes are the highest and second highest revenue sources for our region's counties and cities respectively, making up almost 20% of city revenue and 42% of county revenue. Although we aren't certain about the scale of the impact the pandemic will have on this revenue source, we can almost be certain there will be an impact in 2021. This means many of you have to make significant changes in your municipal budgets, either now or very soon in the future. Through this webinar, we hope to show you examples how some of our local governments are showing tremendous foresight and creativity in preparing for this hardship. Our speakers today, Kay Love and John Walker, will talk about how local governments are adapting their municipal budgets in light of this unpredictable fiscal landscape. I will introduce them in just a minute, but before that, let's go over some housekeeping items to help you participate in today's webinar. This is a screenshot of the attendee interface. You should see something like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right-hand corner. You're currently listening using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane, and the dial-in information will be displayed. If you click away to another application or browser and have trouble finding our meeting again, look for either the blue flower petal icon in your ribbon bar at the bottom of your screen, or look in one of the open browser tabs. You will have the opportunity to submit questions to today's presenters by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel. You may submit your questions at any time during the presentation. I will collect these and address them either after the presentation or during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. You may also see chat messages from me in that window. Finally, recordings of all past ARC webinar series are available on ARC's COVID operations page, which can be found by going to atlantaregional.org and clicking on the red banner at the top of the page. This includes our webinar on virtual public engagement, a guidebook for which is available in the handout section of the dashboard and on the past webinar page. Our next webinar will be held Tuesday, June 16th at 2:30 p.m. With that, let me introduce our speakers for today, Kay Love and John Walker. Kay joined GMA in 2017. As the Managing Director of Georgia City Solutions, she is integral to supporting new and innovative programs, solutions, and research aimed at building vibrant, economically prosperous, and well-managed cities. Kay held leadership roles at several local governments across the state prior to joining GMA. John joined the City of Chamblee in 2016. As the city manager, he directs and supervises the administration of all departments, offices, and agencies of the city, and is highly involved in budget development and project management. John held leadership roles at Safe Built, as well as several local governments across the state prior to joining Chamblee. Kay is our first presenter. We will take a couple of questions after her presentation, followed by John's presentation. After that, I will be asking both of them questions posed by attendees today. With that, I will turn it over to Kay.
Good afternoon, everyone. GMA is excited to partner with ARC on today's webinar. There's a slight delay here. Sorry about the technical delay.
Hey, Kay, it's Jared. We can see it, so your title screen at least.
Yeah, it seems to be frozen. I'm gonna take it off just a second. My computer just does not seem to be working. My apologies.
Hey, would you like me to run the PowerPoint on my screen?
Yes, if you can.
Absolutely. Give me one moment. All right. How does that look for you?
That's fine. We're going to try this again. Apologies to our audience. Okay, if you'll go to the next slide.
Are you not seeing it on the next slide?
No. There. Okay, thank you. So every day we seem to be bombarded with a new revenue source, a new tool, a new headline about COVID-19 and resources that are available. And sometimes it's really easy to get distracted by that. And so GMA has created on our website a COVID-19 resources page so that it is specific to local governments, and the information has been categorized so that you can take a look at that in real time as information becomes available. ARC has information, ACCG has information, and many of the professional organizations that you're associated with likely have information on their websites. It's important to find a trusted source for your information and then stick with that source. Next slide. GMA is hearing a lot from cities about budgets. One of the main things we're hearing about is concern about revenue shortfalls. And there are many cities across Georgia that are not in good financial health. And there's great concern about how they might come out of this COVID-19 and what impacts it will have on their ability to deliver services. Next slide. Within the revenue shortfall categories, we're hearing about severe declines expected in sales tax, TABT, business taxes, property taxes, all the taxes associated with the tourism industry, such as alcohol, excise tax, hotel-motel tax. Since courts haven't been in session, there's expectation that court fines will be reduced, as well as fees and charges, everything from impact fees, development fees to recreation and parks programs fees. We know there are going to be some program cuts. There's indications that there will be some service level reductions for some local governments. Those that are lucky enough to have cash reserves on hand, many will use that to balance the budget this year. And the challenge is what will they do next year to build those reserves back up within an acceptable level? Short-term borrowing will be a tool that will be used in the form of tax anticipation notes. And some communities will develop relief plans whereby they may offer a business tax credit to existing and new businesses, or they may develop payment plans when cutoffs of utilities resume. Many customers will have built up a balance and there'll have to be a way to get that balance paid down. Back in the recession of 2008, 2009, we're seeing some of those tactics being dusted off and utilized during this budget crisis, such as hiring freezes or furloughs, no new programs, no new initiatives, no employee pay raises, looking at employee benefit plans, the cost sharing between the employer and the employee, and taking a look at what that might look like. We're hearing that there'll be reductions in travel and training budgets, and some communities will be restricting out-of-state travel. It'd be really important to find more online training so staff and elected officials can take advantage of that. Some local governments will shift expenses out of the general fund to free them up and put those expenditures in other funds, such as some of the enterprise funds that may be appropriate. External partners and agencies that get subsidies from local government will be hit hard, and particularly related to the state budget. Some of them will already have decreases in their allocations from the state, as well as the local government. So that impact will have to be carefully reviewed. There'll be some local governments that won't have a capital budget this year. There's just not funding available, while others will defer their budget or cut the amount that they allocate for capital drastically. Where possible, local governments will restructure debt to take advantage of lower interest rates, as well as renegotiate existing contracts for better terms. Next slide. So cities are asking, what can we do? And the we is collective. No local government on its own can solve this issue. It's going to take partnerships and collaboration. It's going to take new ideas and new ways of looking at things. Next slide. So what can we do? Well, first and foremost, we can embrace the paradigm shift. We are not going back to the way things used to be. It's just not going to happen. So we have to look forward and develop plans of actions related to the new circumstances that we find ourselves in. And we can advocate at the federal and state level, and GMA and ACCG partner to feverishly work for relief packages for local governments. And most recently, GMA and ACCG collaborated with the governor's office so that a portion of the state funding through the CARES Act will be allocated to all 159 counties and 538 cities. That distribution will be based on population, and that will happen at the end of June. So we're really excited about that. There aren't guarantees for additional rounds of funding, but we are hopeful that our advocacy efforts can continue so that some revenue replacement relief can be put in place at the federal level. To that end, it's so important in advocacy for us to have data as opposed to a possible or we think. And you can help us with that. GMA has created a revenue tracker, and we're asking cities to go in every month and put in their revenue stream information so that we can build a database on actuals so that when we advocate, we have real live data in order to make the case for support. It's important that we all understand what the revenue pie looks like. Where's the money come from? What sources? Which ones make up the largest percentage of the budget? And how will they be impacted? And what steps do we need to take related to the expenditure budget that's associated with that? Developing multiple scenarios from the very worst case to the best case helps. And then developing those action plans within that so as circumstances present themselves, those scenarios can be implemented. And then being strategic and disciplined throughout that. It is so easy to get distracted with the crisis of the day. And it's important that we use those best practices that are in place to help us manage through that. There may be best practices that you want to tweak a little bit or new ones that you might want to add to your toolkit. Next slide. Every decision that gets made by local government has some impact. An impact checklist is helpful in prioritizing the decisions that have to be made. Reviewing policies is critical, and perhaps there's some policies that need to be in place that you haven't had a chance to put in place yet. So looking at adopting those. At the top of the list is always fund balance, the reserve policy, and how COVID-19 has impacted that, and perhaps there's some changes that need to be made in the policy. There are a number of human resources policies that are impacted now. Things such as defining who an essential employee is, overtime, teleworking, facilities policies, all of those things that come into play, particularly where federal reimbursement may be available. Looking at criteria used for capital replacement is another area in the checklist, whereby you may be looking at tweaking the criteria in order for a piece of capital to be replaced, such as years or number of miles. As you reopen city facilities, most communities didn't have a policy in place. So it's really important to put a policy in place that protects both the employees and the public as you begin to reopen facilities, particularly if it's in a phased approach, what we're seeing. Looking for opportunities for conservation and efficiencies, putting those policies in place, along with civic engagement of how you're managing meetings, how you're getting public input, and in general, how information is flowing to and from the community. If you have an economic development plan in place, you may be looking at opportunities to enhance that or change the scope of it in order to help the business community rebound. Any master plan that a local community has should be revisited for what phase and stage it's in. Does scope of work need to change? Where's the funding coming from? Are there contracts in place? There may be opportunities now to implement fast tracking certain aspects of it, while other aspects of a master plan may have to be slowed down or deferred. And all of that should be tied in with the strategic goals and plans of the city. Having a must-do and a nice-to-do list is helpful in prioritizing those, and certainly developing cost-benefit analysis related to the scenarios that you put in place as you build consensus for those to execute. Those should all be based on data and trends that you've been looking at over a period of time. For any capital projects where you've gotten estimates for the project costs, those all should be refreshed, along with re-looking at any fees and charges. If you have a cost allocation plan, an indirect cost plan, refreshing those plans for current numbers is critical. Perhaps you have some assets laying around that are underutilized or not utilized at all that you could sell for a cash infusion. And then reviewing all of the external agency allocations so that if you are making changes to those, looking at what impact it will have on that external agency's ability to deliver a service or to partner with the local community. Next slide. There are a number of financial management tools that are available to you, and I just want to highlight a few right quick. If you go to the next slide. GMA has a few of those tools. One of them is a budget projections model template that provides opportunity to look at different scenarios in the budget, as well as a cash flow template. We've created a dashboard of tools that you can look at your city on certain data points and demographic points. You can also compare yourself to other cities that are like you in different areas of form of government, location, budget, and so forth. And perhaps you want to take a look at those cities and see what they're doing to adapt their budgets during COVID-19. Next slide. This is the budget projections model that I mentioned that GMA has created. It's available on the website for you. You can see the impact of the different scenarios. Next slide. This is a cash flow model. This template shows a 12-month rolling cash flow, and it's a good indicator of a particular month where you may be looking at liquidity issues. Next slide. This is one of the data tools, and this happens to be Chamblee. It's economic data comparison. It compares the city to the statewide average. You can see across the top of the slide there are a number of data sets that you can utilize to sort and slice the data related to your city, and it's a really powerful tool. Next slide. The Carl Vinson Institute of Government has developed some resources available. One of them is a county economic impact report that is complimentary right now that you can request, and that's a very good tool to use with business recovery in a county as well as the cities within that county. They've also developed a budget balancing tool. They partner with georgiadata.org to develop snapshots for sales tax distributions as well as unemployment claims. Next slide. This is one of Fulton County, and you can see in this particular snapshot, this is the distribution for April. And you can see that 19.7 million was distributed as compared to this same time last year. It's down over $4 million. On the graph, as well as in the table, you can look at the commodity sectors that are most impacted. And you can see overall the distribution year over year is down 19%. But the commodity sector that is most impacted is accommodations, understandably so. It's down 66%. This is a good tool to use not only now during the budget process, but throughout the year. Next slide. GFOA also has an economic indicator dashboard that is similar to some of the others, and it may be a tool that you may find useful as well for your local government. Next slide. And in closing, one size does not fit all. Choose the data tools and the resources that work for your community, that will be best for you to achieve your goals, and explore all the options that are available to you before making decisions, and know the impact of those decisions and communicate that to everyone, and continually tweak that plan as you go along and circumstances change. We need to spend more time looking ahead than behind. What's already happened has happened. We can't change it. So spending our time looking ahead will help us work out plans that will be manageable for local communities. Next slide. GMA has a team of consultants that are available, assigned by geographic area to assist you. So please call on us if we can be assistance to you in any way. With that, I'm going to turn it over to John Walker, City Manager of Chamblee.
Hello, everyone. This is John Walker from the City of Chamblee. There I am. And let me make one quick change. And hopefully that is better. Again, my name is John Walker. I'm the City Manager for Chamblee, Georgia. We're a city of a little over 30,000 people in DeKalb County in Metro Atlanta. And we're roughly 8 square miles, or just under 8 square miles. I was asked to talk today a little bit about what's changing in our budget and how we're adapting. And first of all, I think it's important that we recognize what's driving that change. And yes, it's COVID-19. This little virus has had a big impact, but the truth is we're still understanding what that impact is. And especially when it started, we did not know what the impact would be when we started looking at this 3 months ago. We just knew that something was happening. Our spider senses were tingling, and we just needed to be ready. So our first phase of response to this was really not based on data, but was based on the fact that we knew something was coming. So in March, we began to freeze several areas. We froze hiring. We froze a PTO buyback program that we had. We understood that educational conferences were not going to happen. Travel wasn't going to happen. So we froze those line items. Also, we knew our concert series was going to be delayed at the best and possibly postponed or canceled. Summer camps and events were also a concern. So we put a freeze on all of those. We stopped our capital purchases and we stopped implementing any new programs that were new to the budget that year. We also took the additional step of freezing line item transfers within our budget. Normally, our department directors have discretion up to 10% without prior approval. We didn't want to see those particular line items bleed any of that expenditure, so we went ahead and froze that as well. In April, we really started seeing what the impacts were. It was still early. For instance, in sales tax, we only really saw about a 16% drop in our March numbers from what we expected. But we did see that the hotel-motel tax revenue was down 68%. And that was significant for us in Chamblee because 2 years ago, we issued a bond to build a park space and develop that park space with that revenue stream. So now we were faced with making sure we had the funds identified to pay that bond. We knew people weren't comfortable with going out to eat, so we saw less occupation tax and alcohol tax. Interestingly, this hit about 2 weeks before our occupation taxes were due in the city. So we saw at a point where we thought 98% were going to be 98% of the funds would be there. We had only collected 65%. Now, we know also camps, concerts, and leagues and other engagement with residents were not going to happen. And we began canceling those, and fines and fees. Court was also canceled. And police were not out writing as many tickets as previously. So with that information, we entered our second phase. We really didn't want to put our system, our organization into shock by scaling back completely to a new revenue estimate. So we really decided to use reserves to draw down about half of what we anticipated our revenue loss was going to be. We also looked at the data, and since it was still limited, we used the data or revenue projections that were least impactful. That was still a 22% decrease for our revenue streams. So the result of all that is in April, we did go back to the council with a new budget that did use those reserves. We did issue an RFP for banking services. That was already planned, but we did, because of this situation, we did revisit that RFP and looked at adding in additional services that we thought we could either gain better economies of scale with or needed to look at for the first time. We did review all of our contracts. That's still ongoing, actually. But we did cut the budget by about 10%. And that's a little deceiving because we did add into our general fund budget the cost of the bond financing that I talked about earlier that we had previously were using our hotel funds for. So we did cut those frozen items that I talked about earlier. And we did cut the new programs. We also reallocated staffing to vacant positions that we felt were still needed. We did cut positions that were in lower priorities areas and move those people into higher priority areas. You may ask how we chose the higher priority areas. We've been through a couple of strategic planning efforts and program efforts here in Chamblee. We have a list of priorities, 5 goals that we have. Create a greater sense of community identity is one of those goals. Each of those goals have objectives, and each department has programs that, if you can see here, public information, special events, it is for the objective of A4 and A5, which A4 being collaborate to create programs that generate that unique sense of place. We went through those 2 programs we went through. One was a strategic planning effort that we went through. We had an outside group come in. Bill Stark helped us with that. We also went through priority-based budgeting, and that organization helped us identify what our programs were. So each department has identified those programs that work towards the specific objectives, and we publish that in our budget document. We know that the next phase is coming. Right now, we're still watching. We have identified that we are going to revisit our budget in July once we understand more what the revenue situation is for May and June. We know that the impact on property values has been negligible to this point. We do expect to see a lower rate of return, but it's a fairly stable revenue stream. The impact on permit fees has not hit anything in Chamblee yet. So we believe those projects were already in design stages, and they're moving forward with those. We are watching because we expect if the economy remains sluggish that will slow down. And we have paid a lot of attention to our revenue schedule. This is what our revenue schedule looked like in the beginning of the year. We anticipated revenues. You can see majority of the revenues come in October and November, with some of the revenues coming in March as well, mostly franchise fees there. We were doing very well with revenues. Blue is anticipated. The orange color is what we actually received. So we were actually doing fairly well the first 3 months until April hit. One of the positives that we see here is that the next 5 months are anticipated to be our lowest revenue months. So expenditure control during this period of time is critical, but we do believe that the economy has some time to absorb this and potentially make a comeback. It is important to note that the revenue peaks at the end of the year are for property taxes, and for us, that's relatively stable this year. Our fund balance schedule, this is our drawdown of what we anticipated. $6 million is our 25% reserve status that we try to maintain at the lowest point of the year. You can see the red dot represents where we expect our new low point to be, but this was what we originally planned for our drawdown on cash. Our next phase, there will be some tough decisions, and we understand that. We are planning to really look at this once we understand what the new expectations are. We need to understand what the expectations are with our strategic plan, what programs and services and goals and objectives that are high priority now may not be high priority in this new or after COVID-19 moves forward. We have a land use requirement that requires a heavy emphasis on mixed use development, which results in a lot of street level retail. And we were reviewing this based on retail situations prior to this, but now it's even more important for us to really understand our land use policies and what impact that has. We are rethinking our capital projects. Our plan prior to this had 70% of our sales tax money going to streetscape projects, and about 30% were set aside for projects that were public safety oriented. At this point, those safety projects obviously are higher priority, and so we're going to have to really think about what streetscapes provide the largest return on investment for us. Finally, we are really thinking about the cost of staying open. Right now, I'm at the office with about 5 other people, and we have staggered our employees coming back, but we do plan to open to the public next week. There is a cost to that. Right now, we have enough equipment and cleaners to stay open for 2 months, and we understand that we can purchase more, but there is a higher cost staying open right now, as well as some risk, and we want to fully understand that over the next month. One of some of the things that we're considering for solutions moving forward in this third phase, we are looking at different work arrangements to mitigate the opening costs as well as limit our liability. There are work from home options. Obviously, we've been doing that for the last 2 months. We've looked at virtual staff, kiosks, essentially, that link directly to people in their offices or in their homes. And we've also looked at new schedules, working 4 days a week or working every other week. We are renegotiating all of our contracts, looking at specifically what technology can be brought to the table in each of those arrangements. As well as the fact that some of our contracts now are written with service levels that we need to review. For instance, right now we have a right-of-way maintenance contract that is based on service level. And that's a standard that we expect each street to have in terms of appearance. And we may move more towards a task-oriented contract for a short-term period of time. We will be reevaluating service levels, such as occupation taxes, which I mentioned that was down 35% before. We've actually seen an increase there, and it's only about 12% down from where we thought it would be this time of year. But we have a policy where we return those applications within 3 days, and we are allowed to have much more time for that. So we'll be reviewing that. After the coronavirus, which we aren't exactly sure when that's going to be, we do want to re-engage with our community. That's our first priority. Right now, we're heavy on social media. Social media is not very effective as a two-way communication. We push a lot of information out. We see a lot of information, but there's not a lot of dialogue. So we will definitely want to re-engage with a much higher level of service there. We will revisit our strategic plan. I mentioned before that we're rethinking the strategies and priorities in the third phase, but once we move beyond this situation, we'll want to look at that again. Priorities change for any organization regularly, and under extreme situations like this, in extraordinary circumstances, you can expect a much faster rate of change on those priorities. I'm sure we will have some who want to go back to business as it was, but I think there's a fair amount of adaptation and adoption of new priorities that will occur. I already spoke about our land use priorities as well. We'll be looking at that. Finally, we will be rebuilding reserves. That is a policy that we have to maintain 25%. We will be using general fund budget revenues to pay those bonds for the hotel-motel that were previously targeted for hotel-motel until that revenue stream comes back. And once it does, we will slowly use that to rebuild reserves. And that's all I had.
Thank you, John. That's Kay and John to turn on their video and audio so that we can go ahead and start the Q&A session for today. All right. Many changes are being made to current municipal budget policies to cope with the effects of COVID-19. Which of the methods implemented do you think has been or will be most successful at addressing budget deficits?
Well, I'm happy to answer for us. We feel that's what's been effective in terms of managing this situation right now is to pull back on some of our lower priority services and programs. What will be interesting is in the next phase, as we move forward, the programs are much more higher priority in terms of council objectives, and so we'll be looking at that.
Thank you. What has been the most challenging method to implement?
Again, for us, believe it or not, there's been a lot of discussion on the new work week and how we want to move forward with that. So a lot of our employees did not like the extended hours and shorter work week. So that's been something we've been talking about with a lot of internally with a lot of staff.
I think, Molly, some of the things that we're hearing from cities related to what's the most challenging is just not having enough data yet. Those that have a July 1 begin of their fiscal year, not having enough data, and so not knowing how conservative to be, probably being more conservative than they actually will wind up being. So that limits their options of what they're able to do in the budget. And then having that discipline to stick with the plan, because things change daily. So it's a constant retweaking and revisiting. And it seems like a decision gets made, and before they can implement it, something's changed and they're having to regroup. And that's a real challenge.
Absolutely. Thank you. Last question from me, and then we'll dive into the audience questions. Which of the methods implemented do you expect to be temporary changes that will be reversed in the coming years? And which do you think will be made permanent to prepare for future emergency situations?
Well, I can speak for us. We are looking at our service delivery and priorities of our programs, as I mentioned before. You know, some of those programs are pretty high priorities, but they are nice to haves. And so the question will be, how long can do we reduce those service levels for those programs? In terms of what we, maybe longer lasting and stay in place, we've used a budget calendar for several years now, and I think that really helped us in this situation to manage our cash flow, and that has been very useful for us, and I believe helps us moving forward.
I think some of the tools that have been developed during this time, I think some local governments will begin to utilize those as part of their process ongoing, like the ones that John mentioned and other ones that are available. And I think being more conservative than they normally would, not knowing what the future may hold, I think that's a trend that's going to stay at least for a couple of budget years.
Great, thank you. All right, first up for audience question, and this one is for Kay. What specifically do you mean by advocating for state assistance with a 14% cut in the Georgia state budget?
Related to the CARES Act funding that has come down, 2 states, so the state of Georgia received multiple billions of dollars, and so GMA and ACCG have been advocating that a certain percentage of that be distributed to local governments, which it has been. That first round will be based on population, as I mentioned, at the end of June. So there are really tough decisions to be made, and that's why that collective we becomes so important. Federal level, state level, and local level all working together. Be very difficult decisions made and impacts to programs for sure.
Great, thank you. This next one is for John. How long are the events that have been canceled going to continue to be canceled?
We've canceled everything through the end of July. Now, our current plan is to take those events that have been canceled and have those in September and October. But again, we'll be reviewing the situation. That may change.
Thank you. Next up is also another question for John. Did the city of Chamblee allow its employees to work from home prior to COVID-19? Is working from home an option now or in the future?
We did not specifically allow people to work at home. It was something that, individuals might have a situation that came up and we would allow it, but it was not something that was widespread or used often. Yes, we are moving forward. Working from home is an option. We are evaluating every position to determine really what we need from that position in the office. It may be, I do not believe anyone will work from home 100% of the time. It will be a hybrid model going forward, but we've seen with the technology that it can be very effective.
Great, thank you. This next question is for Kay. What specific resources or budgeting techniques for smaller cities?
I think the tools that are on the GMA website, that cash flow template is one of the best tools for a smaller city where cash flow is so important, not only the amount that you're budgeting, but how the money comes in and when, and the ability to be able to make capital purchases or certain things that may happen at a particular time of the year. The other spreadsheet that is the budget projections model is just an Excel spreadsheet, and it's really easy to manage, and you can put your line items in there and then use a what if scenario if it went down by 10% or if it went up by a certain amount, and it will show you the dollar impact. So those two tools coupled together are probably the best for a smaller municipality or a county to utilize, because they're not high maintenance to maintain that information.
Great, thank you. John, you had mentioned that there were additional costs to staying open. Could you provide some examples of some of the costs you were referring to?
Sure. Well, I mean, first and foremost is the PPE that we're providing. You know, we are cleaning the office 3 days a week to a new level, the higher level, and providing that disinfectant spray in the offices. We're also providing every employee with 2 weeks worth of what we believe their PPE needs are. Meeting with the public, being in the office, and we'll be doing that, updating that every 2 weeks, and allowing those, or making sure that everyone has what they need to move forward.
Great, thank you. John, you had discussed PTO buybacks, and I've had a question from the audience that you just repeat what you were saying.
About the PTO buybacks?
Correct.
We had a program where we have a program where we will buy back PTO, and essentially, if you reach a certain level of PTO, we purchase that back from the employee. So we did pause that this year and cancel that for the remainder of the year. Now we do have other employee incentive programs that are not canceled and not deferred. I mean, we do have provide living allowances for post-certified officers and things like that maintain tuition reimbursement. We maintained those, but we did cancel the PTO buyback.
Great, thank you so much. Final question from the audience. Is the state legislature going to attempt to reconvene to get business done that could potentially help correct some of the previous revenue streams, i.e. TABT?
Related to TABT, that one was certainly well along the way. We felt like the governmental relations team at GMA has been working very diligently on that one. Certainly when the legislative session was suspended, it's anybody's guess what work will be able to be accomplished once they reconvene. So we will continue our advocacy efforts in the same way, but nobody knows how that's going to play out. We certainly will keep that updated on our website and on the weekly newsletters that go out related to those efforts.
Great, thank you so much. Next, Sam Shimbaga, Manager of Community Development Group, is going to get on and ask a few questions of you all.
Hey, John and Kay, I just had one question. First, thank you so much for doing this. This is excellent information. So thank you for doing that. I was curious to hear from both of you. There's been some questions which have gotten to it to a certain degree about some of the budgeting changes that you're putting into place, how they will remain maybe in the future. I wanted to sort of expand that a little bit and get your take on what changes do you think, beyond just the budgeting decisions, do you think will be permanent? Like, we have had sessions about talking about doing virtual public hearings, third-party inspections, a lot of different things that local governments have had to quickly come on board with and deploy? And which of those, based on your experience in the last couple of months, do you think are here to stay? And which of those will go away once we're past this pandemic? That was my question.
Well, I will say that I think a lot of the technology related changes that you're seeing are here to stay. I think there's been a reluctance to move forward because if it wasn't broke, don't fix it. But I think that you're going to see a lot of those technology changes stay. We've implemented video inspections on smaller items, smaller permits. These are we're not video inspecting high rises. Please don't believe that. But we have implemented video inspections for those smaller projects. And it's working well. And there was a reluctance to do that before based on, questions of liability, questions of accuracy. This is a situation where the ability to do those remotely actually, that rose to the top. So I think you're going to see a lot of the technology stay going forward. I will say, you talked about third-party inspections and things like that. There's a lot of opportunities for collaboration in those areas among cities, and encourage everyone to look at that. And I fully believe that that's the next step that we'll be looking to move towards is some level of joint purchasing or joint collaboration amongst services.
Okay. That actually is a good segue into the other question I had related to this was, have you seen a growing collaboration that is occurring with your neighboring jurisdictions across the region, across the state, more knowledge sharing in general in light of the situation we're in right now?
I would say yes, from the state level, we are definitely seeing just nothing more than sharing of information of people asking questions to find out how others are handling it, things such as collaborative purchasing, or where can we get PPE, or how are you handling this? A lot of policy sharing. There's no reason for anybody to reinvent the wheel. Somebody else is probably doing something similar that can be taken and tailored or customized for any particular local jurisdiction. So we're seeing that, and some of the ways that we've changed the way that we're trying to deliver business, much like ARC, Sam, is certainly with online training or webinars, or just trying to push information out and make it available as a resource for those communities that need additional resources.
Thanks, Kay. John, anything you want to add to that in terms of how you're maybe collaborating?
I would say that we're not there yet. We haven't gotten to that point yet. There's a lot more discussions amongst cities at this point related to services and what we're doing specifically around, capital projects that we may be looking at. But I believe that we're going to be seeing more of that discussion here in the next 3 months. If you look, several other, large metro areas have established those collaborative efforts in the past, and they've produced great savings for some of those cities that participated. So I believe we will see that here in the next 3 months as we narrow down what our priorities are for service delivery and services.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both again. I will turn it over to Molly now.
All right. As we bring this webinar to a close, both Kay and I would like to thank everyone for attending today. Please feel free to reach out to me, Kay, or John with any questions that we were not able to address today, or additional questions you may have in the future. A follow-up email will be sent with a link to a recording of today's webinar, as well as a survey to share any feedback with us about today's meeting. Please take a moment to let us know how we did today and suggest a topic you would like for us to cover in the future. On behalf of the Atlanta Regional Commission and Georgia Municipal Association, thank you for joining us and have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.